Okay, so before we even open the documents today, I just want you to pause for a second. Look at the date on your phone.
Yeah, it is Friday, February 20th, 2026.
February 20th, 2026. And if you are listening to this in real time, you really don't need me to tell you what the mood is like out there right now.
No, not at all. It is heavy.
Yeah, you open X or, you pull up the Times and it just feels like the whole world is holding its breath.
There is really no other word for it. It is a heavy, heavy moment in history.
We have got these carrier strike groups literally parking themselves in the Persian Gulf.
Right.
We have got this constant, this low-level hum of panic everywhere about uranium stockpiles and red lines. And frankly, it feels inevitable, doesn't it? It feels like we were watching a car crash in slow motion.
The messiness of war.
Yeah.
That is what our sources call it today.
Yeah.
Which is, a very polite way of describing what feels like the brink of World War III.
Exactly. But here is the thing that actually triggered this specific deep dive. Because while everyone is looking at the aircraft carriers, something else happened last week.
Valentine's Day.
Yeah. February 14th, 2026.
The mobilization.
Historic numbers. I mean, we are talking, what, 2 million people?
Up to 2 million, yeah.
Yeah.
Scattered across all these major cities worldwide.
London, Toronto, Los Angeles.
The Iranian diaspora coming out in a way we just haven't seen since, well, maybe ever.
Yeah.
Not at this scale.
And the narrative on the news was all about, look at the support, look at the pressure on the regime.
Right.
You see 2 million people marching, and you instinctively think, okay, this is it. This is the turning point. The people are rising up.
That is absolutely the conventional wisdom.
But then you sent me this stack of articles.
I did.
And I started reading them, and honestly, it kind of ruined the march for me.
I warned you it was dense.
Because this blog called Barackface, which we definitely need to talk about later, is arguing that we are completely missing the point.
It is a provocative take. I won't lie to you, it is uncomfortable to read.
The titles alone. The Great Cosmic Prank Beyond the Bombers. And the central thesis is, it is radical.
Extreme.
The author's basically looking at those B-2 bombers, looking at those 2 million protesters and saying, none of this works.
Exactly. The core argument here is that military might, even the full combined force of the U.S. Navy, is entirely useless against what he calls an ideological bind.
Right.
He is saying you simply cannot bomb a belief system.
And his solution, it is not diplomacy, it is not sanctions.
No. He argues the only way to stop this war, the only way to actually liberate Iran, is for those 2 million people in the diaspora to publicly renounce Islam itself.
To break the bond with the devil, as he puts it.
Yeah. He frames the religion, or at least the regime-specific brand of it, as the root software of the tyranny.
The root software.
Right. And unless you delete the software, the hardware just doesn't matter.
That is a massive, massive claim. And I want to be incredibly clear to you listening to this. We are here to unpack this specific text.
We are not theologians.
We are not politicians. We are analyzing this argument because, honestly, it is the only thing I have read recently that offers a different ending to this movie than a nuclear winter.
It is a third way. It is not war, and it is not the status quo. It is something else entirely. Mass self-emancipation.
So to understand why the author thinks we need such a radical solution, we really have to understand how bad the situation actually is today.
Let's look at the precipice of war.
Right. Section 1, the numbers.
And the numbers are terrifying.
They are. I think a lot of people hear uranium enrichment on the news and their eyes just glaze over.
It sounds so technical.
It does, but the source material is very, very specific about the data as of early 2026.
It is. The source cites that Iran has now hit uranium enrichment levels of 60%.
Okay, play the expert for me here. Why is 60% the magic, terrifying number? Why aren't we freaking out at 20%?
Okay, so let's break it down. 3% to 5% is what you need for a standard nuclear power plant.
Just to keep the lights on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It keeps the lights on in Tehran. Peaceful civilian use.
Yeah.
Then 20% is what you use for medical research reactors.
Okay.
When you get to 60%, there is no civilian use for that. None at all.
You absolutely do not make electricity with 60%.
You do not. And the really terrifying physics of this whole thing is that the jump from 60% to 90%, which is weapons grade, is actually the easiest part of the entire enrichment process.
Wait, really?
Yes. If you have done the incredibly hard technical work to get your uranium to 60%, you are basically just turning a screwdriver a few more times to get a bomb.
You are standing right on the threshold.
You are at the door.
And the stockpile itself. The text mentions a specific number between 408.6 kilograms and 440.9 kilograms.
Which I know sounds like just a random weight, but let's contextualize that for a second. The International Atomic Energy Agency generally estimates you need about 42 kilograms of highly enriched uranium for one single bomb.
Okay, so 42 kilos for one bomb. And if they have over 400 kilos,
See the math.
we are not talking about a bomb.
No, we are talking about an arsenal. We are talking about 10, maybe 12 potential warheads, depending on their mechanical efficiency.
That changes the entire geopolitical map instantly.
Completely changes the calculus. And that is exactly why the text highlights the U.S. stance of zero enrichment.
Right.
The Americans are looking at that 400-kilo stockpile and saying, you cannot keep this. This is an existential threat to the planet.
And the regime is saying, try and take it.
Exactly. Which brings us to the logic of last resort.
Because the author makes a really interesting point here about intent. It is not just that they have the gun, it is what they have specifically said they want to do with it.
Right. I mean, if Switzerland suddenly announced they had nuclear weapons, we probably wouldn't be doing a deep dive about an imminent global war.
No, we definitely wouldn't.
But the source paints a picture of a regime where foreign policy is explicitly about domination and eradication. It quotes these specific threats of missile strikes on bustling hubs such as downtown Dubai.
That line stopped me cold. Downtown Dubai.
It is so visceral, right?
Usually when we talk about this foreign policy stuff, it is all abstract. Regional instability, strategic deterrence.
Sanitized language.
Yes. But when you visualize a ballistic missile actually hitting the Burj Khalifa or, the financial district where tourists are walking around, say, you realize the actual stakes here.
And the source argues that for the regime, that kind of destruction isn't a tragedy. It is a tactic.
They view their neighbors, and specifically the Palestinian people, as instrumental pawns.
Yes.
That is a deeply cynical view.
It is incredibly cynical, but look at the argument the author is making.
The text says the regime does not value Palestinian well-being. It only values Palestinian hostility toward Israel.
They're fuel for the fire.
Exactly. If the ultimate goal is the eradication of Israel, as the source claims, then everyone else in the region is just collateral damage to them.
So put yourself in the shoes of a Western military strategist right now.
Okay.
You have a regime that openly talks about eradicating a sovereign nation. You have this massive proxy network of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis basically encircling the region.
Right.
And now they have enough uranium for a dozen nukes.
I run out of options very quickly. And that is the logic of last resort. The author freely admits war is ugly. He calls it messy. He implies very clearly that innocent people will die.
He doesn't sugarcoat the horror of it at all. He references just war theory, which usually requires both moral righteousness and a reasonable chance of success.
Right.
But he argues that if the alternative is a nuclear-armed apocalyptic cult literally burning down the Middle East, then war becomes the absolute only tool left in the box.
If you follow conventional logic,
Key word there is if.
because this is exactly where the article pivots so hard, we have set the stage here. The missiles are fueled, the carriers are ready, the pilots are briefed.
Everyone is waiting for the green light.
It looks like the only solution is to send in the B-2 bombers.
The ultimate symbol of American military power.
But Section 2 of our deep dive today is called The Illusion of External Rescue.
The illusion.
And this is where the author steps in and says, stop, put the planes away, it won't work.
He calls it the hardware trap.
The hardware trap, what exactly does he mean by that?
We are obsessed with hardware in the West. Stealth capabilities, payload, tonnage bunker busters. We look at the B-2 Spirit bomber, and we see invincibility.
We see a machine that solves problems.
Exactly. But the source argues that this power is strictly physical. And the fundamental problem in Iran, it isn't a physical problem, it is a metaphysical problem.
You can bomb buildings, but you cannot bomb beliefs.
That is the exact quote. You can fly over and flatten every single nuclear site in Natanz. You can destroy all the drone factories.
Right.
But if the belief system that actually created that nuclear program is still running in the minds of the people,
Then you have just trimmed the weeds. You haven't pulled the root out of the ground at all.
worse than that, you have probably fertilized the weeds, you have created a new generation of martyrs, you have completely validated their internal narrative that the West is the great Satan.
So this leads to that central metaphor, which I found really haunting in the text, the bond with the devil.
It sounds so dramatic, almost medieval, really.
It does, but he is not talking about a guy with a pitchfork and horns here.
No. He is using the devil as a stand-in for these deep-seated allegiances to oppressive doctrines. He is talking about the internal operating system of the Iranian people, or at least the religious portion of them.
The internal software.
Right. The argument is that the tyranny isn't just the Ayatollah sitting in a palace giving orders. The real tyranny is inside the minds of the people who allow him to sit there in the first place.
That is a incredibly hard pill to swallow.
It is.
Because it completely shifts the blame in a way. It is no longer just a simple story of bad leader oppressing good people.
It becomes a story of people participating in a system that creates the bad leader.
And that is exactly why he says an external rescue is a complete illusion. Because if the Americans come in and topple the regime, but the people haven't fundamentally rejected the ideology,
You just create a massive power vacuum. And what immediately fills that vacuum?
another Ayatollah.
Or something even worse. Because the root software hasn't changed.
He uses the Berlin Wall as the counterexample here. 1989.
The absolute gold standard of regime change.
Now, I was a bit too young to remember it vividly, but looking back at the history, there were no airstrikes on East Berlin.
Zero. No B-2 bombers. No carrier strike groups in the Baltic.
So why did the wall fall?
Because the people in East Berlin and the people in Prague during the Velvet Revolution collectively decided we are done. They actively withdrew their consent.
They stopped believing in the legitimacy of the oppressor.
It was an internal liberation first and foremost. The wall didn't fall because of mortar fire. It fell because it simply became irrelevant. The people had already mentally seceded from the Soviet bloc long before the bricks came down.
But the author looks at Iran today, February 2026, and he says, we are not there yet.
He says, look at the protesters. Look at the 2 million people. They are incredibly grave. They are out there chanting death to the dictator. But are they chanting death to the ideology?
And that crucial distinction, leader versus ideology, that is the bridge to the most intellectual part of this whole argument.
The Soviet paradox.
The Soviet paradox. I want to spend some real time on this.
Oh, this is absolutely my favorite part of the text. It's a thought experiment that just clarifies everything he is trying to say.
Let's walk the listener through it step by step. Because the author draws this direct line between the Iranian diaspora today and hypothetically Russian dissidents during the Cold War.
Right. So picture the Cold War. Let's say the 1970s. The Soviet Union is an absolute fortress. You have the gulags, the KGB, the entire nightmare state.
Okay.
Now imagine a group of dissidents manages to escape. They get to Paris. They get to New York.
They are out of the cage.
They are out. And they start protesting. They hold up these big signs saying, free Russia and down with the gulags.
Sure makes sense.
But,
Yeah.
and this is the crucial twist the author introduces, imagine if these same dissidents, while protesting Stalin or Brezhnev, still proudly identified as communists.
Okay, stop there. So they are saying stop the oppression, but they're also saying long live Marxism-Leninism.
Exactly. The author asks, does that make any logical sense whatsoever?
No, it doesn't. Because Marxism-Leninism is the exact operating system that created the Gulag in the first place.
Bingo. You cannot demand freedom from the Soviet state while fiercely clinging to the very ideology that justifies the existence of the state. It is a complete contradiction. It is a paradox.
If you are a Russian dissident in 1970 and you say, I love Lenin, but I really hate the secret police, you are fundamentally missing the point. The secret police exist because of Lenin's philosophy of total control.
Precisely. You're trying to reform a system that is inherently designed for total submission.
You can't reform it.
The author argues that you couldn't reform Stalinism to be democratic. It is a category error. It is like trying to make a vegetarian steak out of beef. It just doesn't work.
So applying this direct analogy to Iran, and this is where it gets really thorny for a lot of people, the author is directly accusing the Iranian diaspora of being exactly like those hypothetical Russians.
He absolutely is. He is saying that the diaspora is bravely protesting all the symptoms, the executions, the morality police, the horrific lack of women's rights. But they are refusing to confront the actual cause.
And the cause, in his view, is Islam itself.
Or specifically, the text argues the inability of the people to separate the political identity of their nation from the religious identity of the conqueror. He claims the diaspora is deeply trapped in what he calls the reform fallacy.
The reform fallacy, meaning they think they can somehow have a nice Islamic Republic.
They think they can have a modernized version of the faith that rules the country, but miraculously respects human rights. The author says that is impossible.
Because the system is designed for submission.
Right. Just as you couldn't reform the Soviet Union without completely ditching communism, The source argues you cannot reform the Islamic Republic while keeping its theological foundation intact.
Which leads us directly into the theological core of the argument. And I want to just pause here again and remind you listening. We are reading a text. These are the author's views. We are mapping out his argument.
Right.
But we have to understand these theological views to understand his ultimate solution. Which brings us to section 4, submit or die.
Submit or die. It's such a brutal phrase.
It is very brutal. But the author argues it is the literal historical ultimatum of the religion in Iran.
He does. He traces it all the way back to the 7th century, the Arab conquest of Persia.
Okay.
The argument he makes is that Islam didn't spread through Iran by some peaceful exchange of philosophical ideas. It entered via the sword. The historical ultimatum was quite literally convert or die.
And he connects that ancient history directly to the headlines of 2026.
It is a straight, unbroken line for him. He argues that the regime today isn't distorting Islam, they are actually perfecting its original political intent, which is absolute, unquestioning control.
He uses a term in the text, anti-religion. That really stood out to me.
It is a very specific theological definition he is working with. He argues that a true religion connects you to the divine. It connects you to creation and life.
Right.
But he calls the regime's version an anti-religion because it is entirely obsessed with death and control.
There is this fascinating distinction he makes between God and Allah. Now, usually in the West, people just use those terms completely interchangeably. But the author firmly separates them.
He does. He treats them as two fundamentally different entities in the text. He argues God represents the omnipotent creative force of the universe.
Oh, okay.
But Allah, in the specific context of the regime's theology, is described in the text as lacking power.
That sounds like intense blasphemy to a believer.
To the regime, it certainly is a capital offense. But follow his logic for a second. The author asks, if your God is truly all-powerful, if he's truly the master of the entire universe, why does he need the Basiv militia to beat women in the street?
Wow.
Why does an omnipotent creator need a hangman's noose to enforce his will?
I see. If God is truly omnipotent, he doesn't need human enforcers.
Exactly. The fact that the regime relies on such brutal physical violence proves, in the author's view, that their Allah is actually powerless without human tyranny.
Yeah.
He is a weak deity who requires constant violent defense.
Hence the phrase, the great cosmic prank.
That is the prank. The horrifying idea that millions of people have been tricked into worshiping a political system of control, thinking it's actually a pathway to the divine.
There is a specific metaphor in the text, yellow hay disguised as French fries.
Yes, I highlighted that too.
It is weirdly funny, but also deeply, deeply sad when you think about it.
It is a metaphor for spiritual nutrition. You see the golden color, you smell the oil, and you think, French fries. This will feed me.
Right.
But you bite into it, and it is just dry, coarse hay. It has zero nutritional value. It gives you nothing.
So the argument is that the people are spiritually starving while thinking they are sitting at a feast.
They are trapped in this web of deception. They come to the religion for the community, the tradition, the spirituality. But they get caught in the mechanical submit or die gears of the state.
And this brings us right back to the protesters on the street. Because if the fundamental definition of a Muslim under this regime is absolute obedience,
And a protester is, by definition, not a Muslim.
they are an apostate.
Exactly. And this entirely explains the breathtaking brutality we see in the videos coming out of Tehran.
Right.
To the regime, a protester isn't just a citizen with a political grievance. They are a spiritual cancer. They have broken the sacred contract of submission.
And the punishment for apostasy is death.
Always. So the author is saying to the diaspora, look, stop trying to be good Muslims while simultaneously fighting an Islamic Republic. The two things are completely incompatible. You cannot negotiate with a system that views your very existence as a theological crime.
You have to step outside the system entirely.
You have to break the bond.
Which brings us to the author himself. Who exactly is this guy? The blog is called Barackface.
Which is quite a choice for a title.
It is. We definitely have to talk about that name.
The text mentions his background very briefly. He claims to be Barack Obama's first full-time volunteer in New York City.
Okay, so someone from the political left. Or at least the democratic political machine.
It certainly implies a strong background in grassroots organizing. Someone who deeply believed in the whole hope and change narrative.
So what is the Barackface title about then?
Well, it seems to be a very dark play on blackface, perhaps implying a focus on political identity masks, or maybe the deep disappointment of projecting your hopes onto a political figurehead who doesn't deliver the systemic change you wanted.
It is really interesting that a former Obama volunteer is writing something that sounds, at first glance, like a hard right-wing critique of Islam.
But it doesn't actually read like partisan right-wing talking points.
No, it reads much deeper than that.
It is not political in the standard Republican versus Democrat sense at all. It is highly philosophical. He's not talking about marginal tax rates or border policy. He is talking about the fundamental soul of a civilization.
And he focuses so heavily on the diaspora. Why them? Why not appeal directly to the people fighting in the streets of Tehran?
Because the people in Tehran are inside the cage. If they speak this way, if they renounce the faith out loud, they die.
Right.
The diaspora is outside the cage.
They have the luxury of truth.
They absolutely do. They are safe in London. They are safe in Los Angeles. The author argues they have a profound moral responsibility to use that physical safety to say the things the people inside cannot say.
But he is incredibly frustrated with them.
He is furious with them. You can feel the anger radiating off the text. He looks at that February 14th march, 2 million people, and he sees nothing but wasted potential.
Why wasted?
Because he argues that by demanding liberty without publicly renouncing the slavery of the ideology, they are being profound hypocrites. They want the fruit of Western freedom while fiercely clinging to the roots of Eastern tyranny.
Wow. So let's get to the actual solution here. Section 6. The proposed solution.
Right.
If the B-2 bombers are a trap, and if protesting while remaining Muslim is a logical contradiction, what exactly does he want them to do?
Mass renunciation.
Okay, unpack that for me. Is that a petition they sign? Is that a viral hashtag?
It is much, much more radical than a hashtag. It is a massive spiritual and intellectual event. The author proposes that the diaspora collectively sever the bond with the source. He wants millions of Iranians to stand up publicly and say, we are no longer Muslim. We fully renounce this ideology.
Wow, just walk away entirely.
Walk away. Delete the root software.
But how does that actually stop a nuclear war? I mean, how does me saying I am not Muslim in a coffee shop in Los Angeles stop a spinning centrifuge in Maytons?
It is all about legitimacy. The regime's entire claim to absolute power is that they are the divinely appointed defenders of the faith. They rule by divine right.
The emperor's new clothes.
Exactly. If the people, the global community, collectively reject the faith, the regime instantly loses its moral authority.
They become naked emperors.
They are just thugs in robes at that point.
So if the people mentally free themselves, the regime dissolves.
That is the core theory. Connect it right back to the Velvet Revolution we talked about. Once the people stopped believing in the myth of communism, the tanks didn't matter anymore. The government just collapsed. It evaporated overnight.
And if that happens in Iran?
If that happens, the B-2 bombers become completely redundant. You don't need to bomb a regime that has no followers. You don't need a massive regional war.
So the argument is this is the absolute only way to avoid the messiness of war. You either have the physical war with the bombs or the mental war with the renunciation.
Correct. And the physical war kills millions of people and might not even work in the long run.
Right.
The mental war is completely bloodless, but it requires a massive collective act of courage.
Let's talk about that courage for a second. Because asking someone to just renounce their lifelong faith, that is not like asking them to change their shirt.
It is an unimaginably huge ask. And the source fully acknowledges this. For many, many Iranians, Islam is deeply woven into their culture, their family history, their poetry, their very names.
To renounce it feels like erasing yourself.
It feels like a fundamental betrayal of your ancestors.
But the author flips that completely. This is honestly the most fascinating part of his pitch to me.
It is brilliant framing.
He argues that by renouncing the chains of the ideology, you are actually saving the true Iranian heritage.
He goes all the way back to pre-Islamic history.
Right. He talks about the Persian Empire, Cyrus the Great.
The poetry, the wine, the philosophy of ancient Persia.
Yeah.
The author suggests that the true, authentic Iran is the one that existed before the Arab conquest.
So he is saying to the diaspora, you aren't losing your identity here. You are actually reclaiming it from the conqueror.
Exactly. He frames Islam not as intrinsic Iranian culture, but as an imperial imposition that has suffocated true Iranian culture for 1,400 years.
So renouncing it isn't a loss, it is a liberation.
It is returning to your authentic self.
That is an incredibly powerful narrative. Make Iran Persian again, essentially.
In a way, yes. It offers a very positive, vibrant vision of what comes after the renunciation. It's not just stepping out into an empty void. It is a restoration of a glorious past.
So here we are, Section 7, Synthesis. We have gone from uranium stockpiles and physics to ancient Persian history.
It is quite a journey.
But we have to bring it back to the reality of February 20th, 2026. The clock is relentlessly ticking.
The synthesis is a very stark binary choice. The text leaves us with absolutely no middle ground.
What are the two options?
Option 1, cling to the chains, remain culturally and religiously attached to Islam.
And the consequence of that option?
The consequence is that the regime firmly retains its internal legitimacy. The nuclear program continues unabated, and the only way to stop it is external war. We actively invite the bombers. We accept the messiness. We watch Dubai burn. We watch Tehran burn.
And option 2?
Option 2, shatter the chains, renounce the faith publicly and collectively, delegitimize the regime from within.
And the consequence there?
A bloodless liberty. The weapons become obsolete because the very hands holding them lose their resolve. The system crumbles without a single shot fired.
It sounds incredibly utopian.
It does sound utopian, but the author would argue it is the only realistic path left on the table. He argues that dialogue and reform are the actual fantasies here.
Right.
We have tried talking for 40 years. It hasn't worked.
There was one final detail in the text I wanted to touch on before we wrap up. The prophecy angle.
Yes. This is where he really goes for the absolute jugular of the theology.
He claims, and again, listener, buckle up for this one, he claims there is no verifiable historical Muhammad.
Which is a very fringe scholarly debate that has existed for a while, but he weaponizes it here.
Yeah.
He argues that the entire foundation of the religion is historically shaky.
And he says prophets require prophecy.
Meaning, if you claim to speak for the divine, you should be able to predict the future or shape it in a positive way.
Right.
The author contrasts the regime's ideology, which he sees as a violent dead end, a massive failure, with the idea of an omnipotent God who can actually intervene in history.
He aligns the true God with life.
Yes, he sharply contrasts the death cult of the regime, the martyrdom, the execution, the endless war.
Right.
He contrasts that with a true religion that celebrates life, creation, and human freedom. He is essentially saying if your God wants you dead, maybe you need a new God.
The choice is yours, the text says. Cling to the chains and invite the bombers, or shatter them and render such tools unnecessary.
It puts the ball squarely in the court of the diaspora. It says you are not helpless spectators waiting for American planes. You actually hold the key to this cell.
You just have to be willing to use it.
Exactly.
That is just a massive amount to process.
It really is.
We started this deep dive asking how to stop an inevitable war. We looked at the nuclear math, and it is terrifying. We looked at the aircraft carriers, and they look totally ready to go.
But the answer we found in the source material today is completely unexpected. It is not about drafting better treaties. It is not about enforcing better sanctions.
It is about a fundamental shift in the human mind. It challenges you, and specifically the Iranian listener, to define what freedom actually is.
Is freedom just the physical absence of dictator? Or is freedom the complete absence of the system of thought that created him in the first place?
That is the exact question we are going to leave you with today. As you look at the news tonight, as you see the carriers moving into position, ask yourself, is true freedom physical or is it mental?
And if the answer is mental, then the B-2 bomber is simply the wrong tool for the job.
Exactly. Thank you for listening to this deep dive. It is a heavy topic, but we felt it was the only conversation really worth having today. We'll be back next time with another stack of sources. Until then, keep asking the hard questions.
And keep thinking deeply.
See you next time.